All right, so today what I want to do is go over the process of taking something in Substance a bit more detail, bringing that into Maya, and then what we do with it afterwards, okay? The process we've done so far for modeling stuff, texturing it, or UV laying it out, that's going to be a repetitive thing. Every assignment's going to do the same process. Going into Substance, same process. Taking out of Substance, same process. Going into rendering, same process. So all of these things are the same thing. As long as you get them once, twice, 3 times, however long it takes, you'll be gold, okay? I'm going to use, set my project to, I put it under animated stick, but this is where I have it. So I did this, I lied, it's not there. I have this thing where I work in one project, then I move to another project, then I move to another one, and then I forget where I put stuff. Playing around. Nope, it's under my default. See, it's the last place you look. All right, so I'm setting my project to the default folder after I shrink this down. The start of it. Cool. All right. So this will be a good lead into our next assignment, which is creating basic shapes. So our next assignment is going to rely less on shaping stuff and more on just trying to figure out how to create some basic shapes. So using stuff like this, where we would have like a gear, which is a very basic shape, and then a cube, and then a cylinder, and all these other things, we'll be able to create these kind of simplistic shapes. So as you start your sketching from now, start looking up and trying to design some basic things. So this one here is a windmill. A windmill? No. A water wheel. That's what it's called. So this is one of the trays, so the water would fall down on this, and then it would push it around and go there. So you can see very simple shapes, just some cylinders or pipes. Some cubes, another kind of fancier cylinder because it does have some design to it. And then just kind of a more shaped out or fleshed out little stand for this. You see it has holes in it and like that. Okay, so that's the start of that. And then this one. That's the finished product of it. Okay. So the process, like I said, is the same thing. It doesn't matter if I'm building a human, this thing, whatever. I created all my shapes. I laid out my UVs. And just like I showed on the weapon one that I did, this is what my UVs look like. And if I looked at the checker map for this, and I switched to a different camera, you'll see that all those same things that we had before are still true. We still have squares all over the place. They're all the same size, and they all fit within this box. And we've optimized that box as much as possible. Okay, so those 4 things still apply, right? So I've taken this, I exported this out. So I went to Export Selection. I made sure it's an OBJ. I exported it as a water wheel. And then I go into Substance. So in here, I'm going to go to New. Doesn't matter what project you're working on, this is going to be the same process. The only thing that might change is your option that you would set up here. If you're going to go into Unreal with this, like a gaming engine, you would choose Unreal. If we're rendering this inside Maya, we would choose either this one, which is metallic and roughness, basically a hard object. If it's something that has transparency to it, maybe I have a, our Pokeball was an assignment we did last semester. It had glass on it. If it has glass, that's some transparency stuff. So that would be the next one down, which is alpha. If it was a skin, like I have a person or an alien or whatever, I would do that one, okay? So right now, that's the one that you can be focused on is PBR metallic roughness. Create a texture set per UDIM tile. Okay, so we'll talk more about this as we get more comfortable using these. But this right here is a UDIM tile. If I have a huge item and I want to make sure that each piece of this item is very detailed, I may not want to stuff everything into one, okay? Because that's going to give me one image for the entire thing. And if you look at some of these pieces, so imagine this is 4,000 pixels by 4,000. If I zoom in here to that tiny piece, how many pixels are actually fitting in this area, right? Probably like 10 or 20 pixels. So if I'm able to take that piece and make it bigger, I may be able to fit 100 pixels or 200 pixels in there. The more pixels, the more resolution, the finer detail we can get, okay? So eventually we'll get into using more of this grid, and that's what this refers to. For now, we don't need to worry about that because we're only in that one square. We don't need to worry about importing cameras. That would be for something else. That's actually a new feature. I do need to select my geometry, so I'll select my water wheel. And if it doesn't show up, obviously you didn't save it as an OBJ. It also accepts FBX and ABC and other ones that we don't use, but those are the three that we typically would use. Our resolution, this is what's neat about Substance. If I wanted to create a texture inside Photoshop and bring it inside of Maya or any 3D program, it's locked to that resolution. Here, I can work at one resolution and then export out a different resolution. So that way it works a lot quicker, and then when I'm ready to export, it sends off a higher resolution image, okay? So typically you're gonna leave this at 1,000 unless you need to see that detail while you're working, okay? So 1,000 is good for now. We can change this later. DirectX is fine, and then that's it. So I hit OK. All right, so there's my water wheel. So it brought in everything. You always want to check it to make sure that your model is there. The controls are the same enough that you should be able to navigate this without any issues, okay? Rotating, moving, spinning around. These windows, for whatever reason, seem to be moved on everyone's machine every time they come in. So if you go to Window View, here's where all your stuff is hidden. Here's the toolbars. If you hide the tab or hide the UI or reset the UI, you can get back to where you need to. We're going to first focus on this texture settings. Inside here, it's going to show us all the different materials that are going to go into this. So basically, instead of us just getting a color, we're doing the walls in here. We could find a picture of these walls and drop it on a cube, and that would be the color of it. We also want other stuff. I want to get the height information, so I want a bump map. I want to know what areas are shiny, which areas are rough. I may want to know which ones are metallic or not. So I want all that information, okay? So that's what this is showing us. If we had glass, glass would be another one. Transparency or opacity would be another one of these options here. You can always add it later. If I click plus, I can add all these other ones. So don't be afraid that you can't add stuff if you screw up. Typically, you can do that. So cool. I'm going to scroll down to Bake Mesh Maps. So this is what I was talking about last time, where it's going to go through and figure out what is the kind of surface that this is. Where are the edges touching each other? Where is the roundness? Where's the thickness of each one? So the only thing I need to set on here is I need to say use low poly mesh as high poly. And then I'm going to say my output size is 4096. Okay? So we have two sizes that we're dealing with. One is our document size. This is what we're currently working on. The other one is our output size. So this is going to generate a picture for each one of these things for that shape. So I'm going to hit bake. As I go through and hit that button, it's going to create a normal map. So it's going to show me where all the bumps are on it. It's going to create a world space normal, which is similar. We don't need to worry about that too much. It's going to create an ID map, an ambient occlusion. And all of these maps will be used to drive what the material is going to look like. Okay? So I picked 4096. It's going to take a minute for it to calculate all these because there's so much information there and so big of a texture for each one of those. Something just clicked. All right, now it's developing curvature. You'll see the 1001. If I jump over to Maya and I look at my UVs, it's hard to see, but see where it says U1V1 1001, okay? So it's developing maps just for that. If we had more tiles being used, it would create a map for each one of those tiles for each one of those objects, okay? So thickness, and finished. Okay, so now it created all of these. You want to make sure that you have all those before proceeding, otherwise your stuff won't work correctly. If you hit B, there it is, it'll go through and it will cycle through each one of your areas to see what it looks like. So my thickness, for whatever reason, is looking really weird on this side and really different on that side. And my ambient occlusion is also looking different from one side to the other. So that's definitely odd. Something's going on. I think it's because of my normals. So let's switch this real quick. I'm not going to fix it in this one just because I'm just trying to do like an overview, but just so you can see what it is. Inside your 3D object, you have face normals, okay? So these little green things that are sticking out, let me isolate this. These little green things that are sticking out right here, that's the normal. That's basically saying this is the outside of that face. If I take this object and I negative scale it, even though it's reading the same direction as being out, sometimes the software, like Substance, will read it that it's facing the opposite direction. So sometimes it'll actually think that the normal is on the inside like this, okay? So that's most likely why this is coming off. Now when I imported it before and was using it, there was no issue, it just worked. This time it decided to give me an issue, so whatever. Typically to fix it, I would go into Maya, I would make sure all my transforms are frozen. I would make sure all my normals are conformed. And if I do get something like this as black, that's a definite like red sign that something is not facing the correct direction. So then I would reverse it. If I'm still getting this, even though I know it's right, I may just go over here and grab, oops, I've isolated it, grab all that side and just reverse the normals anyway, and then export it again, and then it should be fine, okay? So sometimes you just have to play with the software until it works. It's just being stupid right now because I'm lecturing. All right, so everything else looks fine. All right, so I'm gonna hit M to get back to my maps. And I'm gonna go down to Smart Materials. So these are the ones that are basically gonna use all of these maps. Regular materials are just flat materials. If I go to my layers, I go to, let's say, this goldish color aluminum, and I just start painting, you can see how I can paint that material on there. Okay, so that's just painting right there on that material. Okay, it looks pretty flat too. You don't really see a whole lot of shape to it. If I go to the Smart Materials and I grab one of these and drop it onto the layer, it covers the entire thing, and in areas where it recognizes, hey, maybe there should be more rust here or more wear in those spots, you'll get more of that. So if you had a stapler like this, the wear spots on this would probably not be too much in the middle. Typically, they're going to be along the edges. So the software recognizes that you have like a curvature here. Most likely you'd have some wear marks there, so it'll actually put more wear marks in those spots. It'll also recognize what's facing up. So let's say that I do something that has, one of these is, one of them is like dusty something. Yeah, dust right there. Okay, so the dust one, do you think there would be dust really on the bottom of that? Probably not, it'd be on the top. So the software is smart enough, the Smart Materials are smart enough to recognize what's facing up and put dust on that area. Okay? Before this software was available, we would have to paint where we wanted the dust to be. So if I want dust on top, I would paint dust on the top. If I wanted wear marks along the edge, I would paint wear marks along the edge. Okay? Hugely time consuming. So there we go, copper worn. Actually, I don't want copper worn. I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to drop in, let's say, wood. All right, so there's that wood texture. Now, I may want the wood texture to look a bit different. This looks pretty kind of grainy looking. I'm going to open up the wood stylized, and you'll see all these different layers. Inside of each one of these smart materials is a whole grouping of materials or whole grouping of attributes that make it look the way it looks. So one of them is wood fibers, another one is grunge, another one is sharpening, more fibers, and then a base color. So if I go through any of these, I can adjust what they look like. If I just click on this and where's my color at? There it is. And I go to the color one and I click here, I can choose a different color. So if I want this to be more red, I want it to be more desaturated, whatever it is, I can change the color for the entire thing. So this isn't generating it's not using like a picture of wood and dropping it on there. This is actually building what wood would look like, okay? So I can change this to whatever I want, blue wood, whatever, green. Let's just stick with a classic wood like that. Cool. I'm going to go to the fibers. And when I click on this, I'll get different options here and over here. Typically for something like this, I want to adjust the scale. So if I go lower on the scale, you see how it gets really like soft. If I go higher on the scale, I'll fit more texture into that area. Okay, so that's one of the areas is fibers. If you're not sure what something is doing, click the eyeball off and see what it's doing. That's the easiest way to look at it and see. Here's sharpen, so obviously that's sharpening it. They may have this area here, which is like an overall area, and then they may have this, which is a filter or an effect on top of it. So if I take the sharpen intensity up, you can see how I can increase the sharpness of that. I'm going to go to my grunge pass, which is like the dirt. You see the dirt. And I'll scroll down to dirt level. And I can control how dirty this is. And you can see as I pull it this way how the dirt's coming off that edge right there. Because it recognizes dirt would be more likely in creases, so that's where it's showing all the dirt. And then I can change the contrast of the dirt so it's a little bit more obvious. That's cool. If I click on this, which is the color for it, you see it's getting a base color and a diffuse color. Okay, so there's that, and here's the diffuse. Nothing really to change there. Here's my wood fibers. Again, I could change the scale. This one's a bit more subtle, so you don't really see it too much, but it's there. Whoops. Wood pattern, there we go, change this one. Cool. All right, so that looks pretty good. I don't need to change anything else on here. I think everything else is good with that. So I'm going to add a different material to the wheel here. I think the wheel would probably not be made out of wood. The wheel would probably, or the pin right here would probably be made out of metal. So I'm going to drop a metal material. The wood is kind of old and yucky, so I would assume it would be like a scratched steel or a stained steel, or even a rusty steel. Let's drop that one. So the way I do it is I just drop it on this layer 1, and then I can kind of reorganize these. There we go. Just like Photoshop, whatever one is on top, that's the one that's viewed, right? And it's that easy. Like if this was supposed to be a metal rusty wheel, it's a metal rusty wheel now, right, instead of the wood one. I'm going to add a layer mask. So I'm going to add a black mask. And then on this mask, I'm going to come over here to the polygon fill. And this will let me select pieces of the geometry that I want to fill with white. Okay, if you're in Photoshop, you're using a layer mask, what does white do? Reveal. And black? Hides, right? So here's my color. I'm at white. I'm going to use object selection. And all I have to do is click on that separate piece. And you'll see now that one has the metal on it, while the rest of it has wood. If I click on, let's say, this one, now that one has the metal on it. And then that one has the metal on it. Okay? So it's very easy to go through and basically customize what each one of these pieces is supposed to look like. You could even do it per face. So if I were to grab, let's say, this one, and I wanted to paint these few faces metal, I could do that too. I don't, so I will put it back. Cool, cool. I may want to open this one up too, and let's see, go to the rust. I'm looking for scale, that's what I'm looking for in here. I don't see anything there. Let me switch back to my brush, and then I should get... My window sizes are like ridiculous. I can't, maybe if I put that there. Oh, that's better, yeah. Yep, there's nothing on that one. Everything's good there. Mask editor. Thickness, attributes, balance, contrast. Anything that says size or scale, that's what I'm looking for. Nothing here, so that's nothing. Metal scratches. Yep, it says brush size. I don't want that. There we go. So scale. Oops. I'll go over to that and see. Okay, so that's that one. Where's the other one coming from? Probably rust, yeah. So somewhere inside rust, there's got to be a scale attribute inside here. Mask editor, balance, contrast. Contrast, nope. Some of them will, some of them won't. It all depends on how they built it. There's another software called Substance Designer. That's a software where they actually build these smart materials to use inside here. So whoever created it, they just didn't include that in there. Yep, nope, nothing there. Maybe if I go to sharpen and sharpen, I can take the intensity up a little bit. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So that's pretty good. Now let me go and close these. I'm going to make a new layer. There's two you can make. One of them is a fill layer, and the other one is just a straight up layer. So if I'm in Photoshop and I'm painting, that's just a regular layer. A fill layer is what you typically want to use. So I'm going to use a fill layer here, and it fills it with whatever color I've chosen. So let's say that I'm going to color this, just for the fun of it, I'll color this like a dark red, like that. Okay, so now this is dark red. You'll see that the other colors are still kind of coming through. The bumps and all that are still coming through this. So I'm going to right click and then, oops, not right click. I'm going to click over here and then add a black mask. And then under my smart materials area, there's smart masks. And what these are, the same things that are controlling where the rust is and where the grime and all that is, you can drop these onto this, and now that will be your mask. So if I'm trying to get something where the, let's see, here you go, stains and scratches. So if I want this to have that kind of look to it, this is going to create a mask that will do that. So now you'll see I have these red spots kind of in those areas. And if I want to change the color, I just go back to this, go back to that color, and then I can change it. Typically, I like to have the color a bit obvious first. That way, as I go and tweak it, it's a lot easier to see exactly what I'm tweaking. Yep, that really helps make it pop a bit more, just having that on there. Cool. Let me create another one. All right, this one I'll leave it as bright red just so we can see what it's doing. I'm going to create a black mask. And then any of these masks you can use. So you just drag it just like that. I can also use particle brushes. And what these are, they're going to generate real life events so that you can basically simulate stuff. Okay? So let's say that there was a fire by this water wheel right at the base of it. So I'm going to go to burn. And now this is my brush. I click and drag. And now that follows it up there. So if this was something that actually like lit on fire and that burned it, that would be what it would do. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. This probably won't look as good because of the UV screen being screwed up a little bit. There we go. That's cool. Now I can go back to my color, go back to this, and let me switch to the other side so I can see it. There you go. So now we have like some singe marks on there. There's also rain. And if I click and drag, oops, on the layer mask, you can see how it's like raining and going upwards for some reason. That doesn't make sense. Why are they going up? Let's do sandstorm. There we go. And the longer I hold it down, the more sandstorm happens. And what we'll see is it'll actually start to like streak down it. So I'm really holding it down to get more of that to show up. Stroke opacity, that. Yeah, you can see the lines changing. I can see it. Yeah. So this is obviously more subtle. Here's little veiny ones. These are like one of the coolest things about it because you can really create some cool things. Gorgeous. Okay, so let's pretend that we're done. I've created all these materials. I've set this thing up. Looks perfect. Now I'm ready to take it outside of Substance. I'm going to export. Well, first I'll save. Get ready for this to be a huge file. If you look at the one I created previously, it's 2 gigs. All of these images and textures and painting are all saved within that one file. Okay? So be careful saving iterations because you could end up with like 20 gigs just in like 10 files. Ooh, that's loud. Okay, so we save it first, and then we'll let it save. Okay, and then we're going to export it out of here. So we'll export the textures. We have to specify where we want this to go. So I'm going to send this to my P drive, 2520, weapon, source images, select folder. It's going to call it water wheel, base color, roughness, metallic, blah, blah, blah. Right now it's configuring it using the PBR metal rough. Substance doesn't know where we're taking this thing. It doesn't know where the file came from. It doesn't know where we're rendering it, so it just gives us these kind of like default settings. We're rendering everything through Arnold. So if we come in here and we find Arnold, which should be at the top, Arnold 5 AI standard, it'll automatically default to the ones that we're going to need. So base color, metalness, roughness, and normal are the 4 that we're going to need. It also gives us height and emissive. We can just ignore those. I'm going to also change the document size. So remember when we first started this up, we set it to 1024. Now I want to set this to 4096. So I'm going to set it to 4096. I put it in my source images. I picked Arnold. And then I say export. So now what it's going to do is it's going to write out the color information for all these pieces, the bump information, the roughness, and the metallic for each one of those pieces. And as quickly as I did that, I know it wasn't super quick, but I'm at 29 minutes in the video, so it's relatively quick. Something like this for us to go through before, like Mari, that's what we used to use Mari for, was painting all these textures. It literally would take forever because you had to, if I wanted wood, I would have to find a picture of wood, bring it into Mari, and paint the wood texture on every single piece from every single face. And where the 2 faces line up, I would need to go over there and make sure that everything blended nicely together. Okay? Here, I want a different wood, drop a different wood on there. All right, so here's my images. That's what we get out of this. That's the whole point of going to Substance, is that we get a color, a height, a metalness, a normal, and a roughness. These are what are going to make our image look fantastic. just so you can see it inside here, and I did show this last time, but I like to show it just so you can get an idea of what it could look like. If you click the camera, this takes it into iRay, which then lets you kind of see a more photorealistic view of what this is going to look like or what it could look like when it renders out. Okay? More settings are on the side. You can play with it. So now I'm going to jump back to Maya. I'm going to delete this random cube. And I'm going to assign a material to this. So all of our materials inside of Arnold that we're going to use, the standard surface, so AI standard surface, 95% of the time we're going to use that. So I will call this water wheel. And then we have to connect what what we just created to this. Okay. So we have a diffuse or color map, so we're going to connect that to color. Pay attention to which color it is because there's a base color, which is this thing. There's a specular color, which is that, and there's also other colors down here. Regular color, I click, go to File, and then I find my images. Oops. I have to reset my project back to the correct one because I'm still under the old one. All right, so there's my base color. And just by putting this on here, I should get at least the color from it. All right, so there's my color. I want to turn off this filter type. This image, if we don't turn this off, it automatically comes in like filtered, like softened a little bit. So I turn that off. I don't want that. Then I'm going to hit this back button right here at the bottom. I'm going to go down to metalness. Go to File, go to Folder, and go to Metalness. Now this is going to show us how much of this is actually reflective. I'm going to turn this filter type to off also. I also have to come down here under Color Balance and change this alpha is luminance, and I'll show you why when we get back to the material. When we look at this metalness attribute, it's a single number. It's 0 to 1, just like this is. Okay? So when we feed it a file like this, which is a picture, it doesn't know what to do with that picture. Okay? So we have to say basically use the brightness as a 0 to 1. So wherever it's white, it's a value of 1. Wherever it's black, it's a value of 0. And anywhere in between, it's in between. Okay? So just the rule of that is anytime you see something like this, it's going to always be alpha is luminance. Okay? Roughness will go here. I go to File. I go to Folder. I find roughness. It names them perfectly, so as long as you know what the names are, it's just connecting it to the name. Okay? And because roughness is a 0 to 1, I click that. Okay? If you forget, you can always hit the arrow here and then get back and change it. You'll kind of notice it as you render your stuff out where it just doesn't look right. And then the last thing I need to do is under Geometry, under Bump Map. I'm going to click on the file here, change this to Tangent Space Normals. Go to the file at the top and load in the normal. And then what the normal map is going to do is basically give us a bump. So it's actually going to look like it's bumpy some. This bump map, and this is kind of like a glitch inside of Maya. They may have fixed it, but we'll just go through the process anyway in case they didn't. Filter type is still off. That's always. And then for the color space, I'm going to change this to raw. And what would happen sometimes is when you connect the bump, this thing would turn black. When you change it to raw, it fixes it. Okay? So on mine it was fixed. On yours it might not be. Now you know how to do that. So that's it. Okay, so now we have basically the same texture we had when we were in the other software. So now what I need to do is just set up my stuff to render. So I'm going to just group these things and hide them so we don't see that. Make my window bigger. Nope, that's as big as it's getting. All right. I'm going to go to Arnold here, and I'm going to add in a sky dome. And this is how I light a lot of things inside Maya. I add a sky dome. This gives it a flat color. Whenever we render something that's an image, Maya will convert it to Arnold textures and then render it out. Okay, so that's what it's looking like right now. Not too bad. I like to have some kind of environment, so I'm going to click on the mapper for the color, go to File, and then I downloaded an HDR. If you don't remember what an HDR is, or they never showed it to you in the intro class, it's a high dynamic range image. Oops, under source images. And you can go online and you can find them for free that you can use inside your scene. There's several websites. So I'm just going to connect this noon grass one. And what this is going to do is what should happen is it's going to use the lighting information from this image to light my object. So instead of having it perfectly lit from all directions the same intensity, this will light it up different, just like the regular world does. There it goes. So now you can see a huge difference in what we're getting here based on what we had just a second ago. All right, that looks good. I can turn this quadratic off. Cool. This wasn't there yet. I'll put that in there. All right. Oh, it pops open there. Okay. So if you look at this, you'll see that it's there. We see definitely some coloring, some differences between the two surfaces. We don't see any shadows on the ground. Okay. And so I'm going to scoot this aside. I'm going to create a polygon plane. I'm going to scale it up huge, like 500. That's a disk. I guess it works. There we go, 500. And I'm going to assign a new material to it. Now this is the other 5% of Arnold shaders that you would use. So the first one we use is AI standard surface. Anything we're going to render, plastic, metal, glass, whatever. This one we're going to use as a shadow matte. There it is. And a shadow matte basically will not render the actual surface. It's basically see-through, but any reflections or shadows or anything will land on top of it, giving it the appearance that it's in the scene. Okay? And if I take this ground plane and just scoot it up a notch, then this will look like it's actually touching the ground instead of floating. And I'm also going to go into my render settings real quick. Window, render settings. And I'm just going to knock these settings down, because I still have them on the render quality settings I was using before. All right, there we go. Okay. So that gives us an idea of what it's going to look like. I also may want to create another light. So I'm going to create an area light. I'm going to make it big. The bigger this is, the bigger the shadow is going to be. Okay. I also should aim this kind of like, if you look, the sun is basically like straight up in the air. So that's why my shadow is like right on top of this right here, because the sun is shining like directly down on it. I don't see the sun, so I can kind of make up my own if I want. So I'm going to kind of angle it like this. And then come in here. Oops. And then render that again. Nothing changed. It looks exactly the same. The lights by default are way too simple. So I'm going to go to my light. So I hit Control A, I find my light. And this is where having multiple screens really helps. I make the light incredibly bright. Make sure this is on play. There we go. And now you can see how this just lit up a bit more. And now our shadow is not just underneath, it's actually kind of falling over here. So we're getting a little bit more realistic view than we had a second ago. All right, so that looks pretty good the way that is. Yeah, that was good. I could also use color temperature if I wanted to. We talked about that before. Not in this class, I think in the other class we talked about it. Basically, this will help us tint our light. So if we wanted this to be more of an orangish light or a bluish light, we can have that happen too. You just got to find that magic number that makes it look like it's naturally in there. If I go too high with this, way too bright for the scene. Way too bright. 4 actually looks like it's a pretty decent brightness. I may also want to grab the sky dome here and maybe tell it not to cast shadows. So maybe I don't like the shadows that are coming off that sky, so I say don't cast shadows. I'll cast them with this area light. If they're too soft and I don't see them very good, I may want to grab my area light and take its scale down. The scale controls the size, so if this is 10, 10, and 10, the shadow will be a lot tighter and a lot more crisp. If it's 1, 1, and 1, even tighter and even more crisp. Okay, so you get the idea what's happening with that. I think 20 would probably be good. There we go. Cool. So now I have my material set up. I have my shadows set up. It actually kind of looks like the grass is actually blended in here. That's just coincidence. That's nothing that I've done. For your weapons, there's not a whole lot you can do as far as animating it, but just so you can see, this one I did animate it just turning a little bit. So I grabbed all the stuff that would move together, and I just Control-G grouped it. I went to the beginning, I set a keyframe, I went to the end, rotated it some, set another keyframe, and then just let it play. Okay. I also did, make a new camera here. I know this is my good side. This is the one I've been setting up all my lighting with, not this side. This side is. So I changed my focal length on the camera some. I'm going to click this blue circle and line it up. That looks good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of my pieces in here. So this could be any piece inside your weapon that you choose. And under Animation, I'm going to go to Visualize Turntable Option Box. And I'm going to set the frames to 480. That'll give me a 120 frame animation. And counterclockwise, and then clockwise. And turntable. Every time it's wrong, so we'll see if I did it right. Yep, it's wrong. There we go. Let's try it again. Visualize, turntable, counterclockwise, turntable. There we go. Cool. So now this creates basically a turntable animation as the camera's like sweeping around it. Now I did 480 frames, and this is only 120 frames because I wanted my animation to only play half of this. I don't want the whole thing all the way around. It's better like that. And then what that does when you do a turntable is it creates this group. Inside the group is your camera, your turntable camera, and the group is what gets animated. So if you look at this from a different view, there's the camera that it created, and you can see how it's just going around that shape. Okay, and the only thing I want to change is I'm going to go to my graph editor, grab this, and then say linear. And just like if you're in my After Effects or any of the other classes, sometimes you want linear, sometimes you want, ease in, ease out. For something like this, We definitely just want it to be linear movement. So there's no slowing down of the camera. It just goes at a steady pace. Okay, then I'm going to let you decide how you want to do the last part of this. This is the easy part. Okay, eventually you'll do this if you want to jump into it right now because you just want to get used to it right away. Feel free. This is going to be, not that one. Render settings, there we go. So the simple stuff, you go into your render settings. Give it a name. Water wheel, weapon, whatever it is. It's not a shield. It's nothing. There we go. EXR, zip. We went over this last time, right? Name.number.extension, my start and end frame. No, we went over this in the other one. This will be on there for other stuff you'll see, but typically you want to have that clicked. You pick your camera, so turntable 2, turntable 1, whatever it is. For all of our animations, 960 by 540. Okay, so all you're going to change in this one is the name of the file. Make sure this is name.number.extension for any animations. Start frame, end frame, pick your camera, pick your resolution. This is what it is for all animations. Under the Arnold renderer, you'll probably take this up to 4, and this up to 3, and this up to 3. These settings here are how smooth or refined your anti-aliasing is, your diffuse is, and your specular is. The more detail you have, the higher this number has to be. The more colors you have, the more that diffuse has to be. The more bounces of reflection you have, the higher that number has to be. So that's cool there. Under, yep, that's it. Okay, so that's bare minimum, and then you would say render, and then you would say render sequence. Make sure your camera's picked, and then you would say go. And then Maya would just go through and shoot out all your renderings. Okay, so that's bare minimum. You'll get a sequence at the end of it. If you want to start off looking at what you can do with this later, that's where Nuke's going to come in. Okay, so I'm not going to go over the Nuke part right now, except just to show you what it will is capable of doing, and I'll show you the Maya part today. Okay, Monday I'll show you the Nuke part. So here is my original water wheel rendering. There is the finished product. Original, default, basic, advanced. Okay? So it's all in how far you want to start pushing your skills. By the end of the semester, you'll be doing this. Right away, I'm fine with you doing this, but eventually you'll get to that. Okay? So this is how I set up that first stage of this. Inside Nuke, I have to be able to separate all of my elements. That's what this is. Whoops. Come on. There you go. That's what this is. So all of these things are separate elements. When I first rendered it, this is how it came out. There's the wheel, there's the ground, done. But I needed to be able to pull out things like my ambient occlusion. Why aren't you ambient occlusioning? Oh, it's my specular. There it is. So this is my specular. This one is my depth. So if I look at the depth channel, there it is. This one is my ambient occlusion. And then this one is my shadow. Okay, so I'm able to extract all those things so that inside Nuke I can put it all back together and choose how each one of those things apply. It's difficult to do that inside here. People in the industry never render anything straight out of Maya and then put it out for the world to see. They always go through Nuke or Photoshop or After Effects or something in order to actually compose it to make it look fancy. Okay, So inside Maya, they have these things called AOVs, which is arbitrary output values. I think that's what it stands for. Render passes is another word for it. That's what I just call them. So a couple of ones that we are always going to use. You always use a Z-pass. The Z-pass is your depth. So how far from the camera to your last object is stuff in the scene. If I look at my original image and I look at my depth pass, you can't see anything right here that looks like solid red. But if you look down here at these red numbers as I move my mouse, you can see how those numbers are changing. So that's actually recording from my camera how far each pixel is from it. If I scroll this back down, and I scroll this one back down, then you can actually see that starting to come through. And there's actually a difference between right here, which is 54 centimeters away from the camera, and way back here, which is 59 centimeters away. Nuke can use this information to do a lot of things. One of them is create depth of field. It's easy to create depth of field inside 3D. It's difficult to change it afterwards. In Nuke, we can change as much as we want. If I want to put my focus point right here, no problem. I click the button, it's there. If I want to move it over here, I click the button, it's there. If I want to make it wider or shorter, I can do that. If I want to animate it, I can do that. In 3D, it's not very intuitive. It takes forever to do. And just so you can see, wherever I have my Z defocus, there it is. Okay, so obviously my wheel is in focus. If I change this to the background, now the background's in focus. It looks horrible because my settings are not set up for that one, but there it is. My focus is now over here. My focus is now right here. I can control the amount of focus. Really easy. And like I said, all these things can be animated. Okay? So Z to focus or Z pass, something we always want to have. We also want to have an ambient occlusion pass. So that is right here, I believe. Yes. Okay? So we should get a black and white rendering. Wherever items are touching or close to each other, we should get blackness or dark, dark gray. And wherever they're not touching so much, like here or there, we should get white. So for whatever reason, they don't include it. Like that should be a gimme, but they don't. Whatever. So I'm going to go to Add Custom, say AO. And then under this arrow, I'm going to go to Select AOV. I click in here, I hit Control A, and then what I'm going to do is on this shader, I'm going to click the Map button, and then under Arnold, I'm going to find Ambient Occlusion. Now this is a cool thing to, just to kind of see, I guess. When you do your render, there's a drop down. If you don't do any passes, you just get beauty. If you go to AO, you can actually see what it's going to look like before you render it out. That was not something that was as easily available before. So very gray, I want more contrast. So I'm going to just start playing with my settings here. So you'll see as I pull this down, there you go, I'm getting a lot less spread. You can see if I pull this up, there's a lot of gray way out here. As I pull that down, it tightens it up some. I can also take my fall off and pull it up a little bit. Okay, it's very subtle, so you may have to type some numbers in. Let's say that's 5. Let's say this is 0.2, 0.1. Actually, 1 might be a good number there. Yes, 1 looks like a good number, and this looks like 5 is a good number. Every scene will be different. Figure out what's going to be best for your scene. Okay? The idea here is that where we have these things touching, we have that black. Where items are not touching, like in the middle, we don't have anything. If you look at this here, oops, let me switch these. Here's the before and after with and without ambient occlusion. So you can see there's a huge difference between this without ambient occlusion and this with it. Okay, so it really helps give some depth to your scene. So that's those two. I'm also going to export out coat, diffuse, direct, indirect, specular, and shadow. I think I use shadow mask. Shadow mask, yes, and shadow mask. Okay, and then the second they're added here, the second they're available. Here's what diffuse looks like. So it's basically just the color. My did I put the specular? I thought I clicked it. Specular's there. I'm just not seeing it. There it is. So here's the specular. Here's my shadow. Here's my indirect. Here's my direct. And here is the coat. Now in coat there's nothing right now. So this might be one for this scene I don't need. So I'm just going to take that off because it's not there. That's a different render pass that we could use for other stuff. Okay, so that should be it. I take all these. Once you added those, then that merge AOV should be there. So then you can merge everything into one. And what that means is when you render your stuff out, you get one set of files that has all of your stuff locked inside it. So I don't need to worry about basically a different sequence or a different set of files for each one of these. That's what it would do otherwise. So I would get water wheel AO, I would get water wheel Z, water wheel diffuse, water wheel direct, indirect, shadow mask, and specular, all as separate files. Okay? You want to start doing these the correct way, so you want to merge everything into one, and then when we're inside Nuke, then we can extract it and pull it out. The awesome thing is, once we do this one time like this, it's set up. Anything else that we bring in, it's simply a matter of changing this top file and then changing some other parameters down here, and that whole tree is already set up, okay? So we don't have to worry about rebuilding this thing every time. Here's another one that I did. Oops, not that. This thing here, and again, you can see this is with and without ambient occlusion. Here's another one, with and without ambient occlusion. Not a whole lot of Z to focus on this one, I think, until we get here. Yeah, so you can see a little bit of Z to focus on this where we get a little bit of depth of field. Same thing here, you can see there's some depth of field in the back, crisper in the front. And there's the default. A little bit of glow, that's too much glow. There we go. So there's a lot you can do inside Nuke, it's just a matter of getting used to it. So whether you want to do it now and later, or now or later, it's up to you. Okay? So once I'm satisfied with how that's set up, I'll go to render sequence. Make sure that my camera is picked, say render sequence and close, it outputs all my sequences, okay? And it'll just chug through. The computer will be up like this, and it'll render out. Figure out how long it's going to take for one frame to render. Pretty much if you multiply it by how many frames you have, that's how long it's going to take to render out, okay? That's good. So you want to obviously make sure that everything is cool before you take off for the day or the night or whatever. In an earlier class today, somebody thought it was good, hit the render button and walked away, and they didn't realize they were only rendering one frame, not all the frames. So make sure that you do set your stuff up, make sure it's processing, make sure you name things so that you can find them. So under my weapon, there's my water wheel, right? So I know it's called water wheel, so I can search for it. I recommend also putting your last name in there somewhere so you can find it, but I know it's water wheel. Cool. So model your stuff, lay out the UVs, get it into Substance, bring it back into Maya, and then render it out. Questions?